What do you think an independent Britain, a Britain no longer part of the EU, would actually look like? There are those who say it would look very lonely, very isolated.
Well, how stupid, how absolutely stupid. What we'd be doing is we'd be breaking away from political union here in Brussels and rejoining the rest of the world. I mean, goodness me, we have a Commonwealth that has within it nearly 30% of the population of the globe, and some of the most dynamic, buzzy economies. You know, one thinks of India and countries like that, and we'd actually be able to negotiate our own trade deals with these people. We'd be able to play our role as part of the globe rather than this very, very narrow, introverted view that Europe is somehow the beginning, middle and end. It isn't.
Well, it is just next door. It's a heck of a lot easier to trade with Germany or France than it is with the subcontinent.
Bunkum. What absolute bunkum. Look, I was a commodity broker before I did this. I spent 20 years in London dealing in mostly copper and aluminium and commodities like that. Frankly, the press of a button, it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with Paris, Frankfurt, Beijing. We're living in a global economy.
That's certainly
We're
true
living in a global
financial
economy, and increasingly, Britain's reliance on foreign trade is not through the manufacture of widgets in Birmingham. It is through financial services, insurance, and all of those things.
Well, I'd certainly buy that in terms of financial services, but if we take other services, non-financial services, there are big cultural differences. These distances matter. You can't just nip over for a client meeting.
Goodness me, there are big cultural differences, and we're 23 miles from Dover to Calais. I mean, of course there are huge cultural differences. Look, I am not for 1 minute saying we don't want to have a good, healthy trading relationship with European countries. Of course we do. Of course we do. And of course, in terms of heavy physical manufactured goods, what we do with Europe is going to be greater than what we do with the Far East. But it's all part of an overall picture of trade. And Britain's position in the world is we're not a great manufacturing nation. We're never again going to be, not at least in my lifetime, a great manufacturing nation. We will do our overseas trade with professional goods and services, and with that you can simply press a button. And can I just finish by saying that it's in the interests of France and Germany and the other European countries to have that free trade deal far more than it's in our interests. I mean, after all, Norway sells 75% of our overseas goods to countries that are members of the European Union without being a full member of it.
Funny you should mention Norway. I was just about to cite the Norwegian example of a good reason for staying in. The Norwegians all say, if you go to Norway, that they get all the disadvantages and none of the advantages.
It's one of the clever arguments that gets put out.
Well, this is what Norwegians say themselves.
Well, that's what some Norwegians say. Yeah. Oh, sorry, it's what Norwegian politicians say. And this gets to the heart of the whole European debate. The Norwegian people do not want to join the European Union, but of course the Norwegian politicians have always wanted to join the European Union, and we see this everywhere. This epitomises the battle. It's the politicians on the one hand and the people on the other. Yes, the Norwegians, buying and selling from a single market, have to comply with legislation over which they haven't had a say. Just as if we're selling things to America, we have to comply by their standards without having a vote on how those laws are made. But, you know, the Norwegians have no ties in terms of foreign policy with the European Union. They have no ties in terms of their fishing industry, where they have a 200-mile limit. They are opted out and exempted from all the things that really make the British mad.
In your model of Europe, where, as you say, you've got this collaborative model without the big superstructure, what guarantees that anybody's going to come to an agreement about anything?
Well, that of course is the one argument that I hear in this Parliament over and over and over, that we have to be more efficient, and to be and effectively what we're saying is that to be efficient we have to kick democracy off into the long grass.
No, it's saying if you're going to have a club, you need some rules at least for people to come to decisions.
Well, you know, we've sat there in NATO for 60 years. And worked very happily, sitting around a table as sovereign governments, and made decisions. And hey, we're engaged right now in this mission up in Afghanistan. Whether you think that's good or bad is irrelevant. The fact is, we've proved through NATO that intergovernmental cooperation can work. And if there are times when we can't reach agreement, well, so be it. So be it. If that's the downside of the model that I'm proposing, the upside is that we will actually be able, in every country in Europe, at general elections, to vote for the people that govern us. And that is what Europe is taking away from us.
But if the areas where agreement no longer become possible on areas like, for example, climate change,
Yes.
Arguably, people will be cutting off their noses to spite their face.
No.
Yes, we've got this happy new democratic model, but we're all drowning in...
Well, this is the argument of dictators, isn't it? I mean, a dictator would say, I've got to get rid of democracy, I've got to get rid of the will of people, it's too inefficient, I know what's best for you. And frankly, when it comes to climate change or anything else, I don't think the European Commission knows what's best for us.
But I come back to the point, this is democratic, you're a democratically elected representative yourself. You've got a problem with the civil servants over the road.
This is a charade.
Where the problem lies.
This is a charade. If in this new treaty, if the European Parliament had been made within these institutions the place from which the government of Europe came, and we had ministers who were accountable in question time every week to this Parliament, then you could argue that there was some real democracy within the European Union. This is the first Parliament I can think of that dares to call itself a Parliament that doesn't have the ability to propose or repeal legislation. It's not really a Parliament.
What then is your tactic going forward? You are still a very small party.
Well, that depends how you look at it.
How do you bring about this massive change?
Well, you say we're a very small party.
Numerically in the Parliament.
Well, yes, OK. Numerically in the
terms of parliamentarians, I mean, sorry, yeah.
Numerically in this institution, we are numerically small. I have a feeling that after next June we're going to be very much bigger. I think that Eurosceptic, Euro-realist parties across the European Union are going to get a lot more votes next year than they got in 2004. And the reason for that, of course, is because there are 9 countries where referendums were promised on the European Constitution and where they've now been denied. So that's going to happen. It obviously depends just how big the next Eurosceptic group here is. But our tactic will be the same one that we've had in all the years that we've been here. We will work together with like-minded groups from other countries, and we'll do everything we can to let people really understand the influence that the European Union has over our daily lives. Nothing makes me angrier than picking up a British newspaper and seeing the European Union covered as world news or foreign news. It's not. 75% of the laws by which we live in Great Britain are made in these institutions here.
Apart from the sort of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad approach of Europe bad, us good,
I think if you look,
where's the depth?
I think if you look at what the Independence and Democracy Group did in the Irish referendum, you'll see where the substance was. We put together an 8-page information booklet, done in very simple terms, and we posted that out to 1.9 million households in Ireland, telling them the truth about the Lisbon Treaty, the truth about the powers that it would transfer. And I think, whilst numerically we may be small, I think the influence that we had in the Irish referendum was very big indeed.
You see, so you've cauterised any possible danger from the extremists.
Absolutely.
On the other side, you've got an increasingly Eurosceptical Conservative Party. Have you got a big enough political space to occupy?
Well, I think, it's a funny thing, but I think when Michael Howard was leading the Conservative Party, there was some real Eurosceptic talk. And we saw, for example, the pledge to take Britain out of the common fisheries policy. Now, Cameron has got rid of that pledge. Cameron made a promise to leave the EPP group, which he hasn't and will never, in my opinion, fulfil. Now, I actually believe that under Cameron, the Conservative Party is less Eurosceptic than it was 4 or 5 years ago.
And when we see your manifesto, will it be a single-issue manifesto on membership, or will you have a full raft of policies on agriculture, on industrial policy?
I've currently got 18 working groups within the party putting together policy. We have retired rear admirals working on our defence policy, and we have people with decades of experience in the fishing industry working on that policy. And what we're doing is we're putting together a blueprint for how we think an independent Britain could and should be run. But above all, the point we'll make is that all this debate's irrelevant, all the while 75% plus of our legislation is made in Brussels and not made in Westminster.
You used the phrase a moment ago, mad and bad. The next one in that chain is usually "and dangerous to know." Do you sometimes think that's how your fellow parliamentarians feel about you?
It's a funny one, Matt. I think since the Irish referendum, I think there are now people in this Parliament, particularly Mr. Schulz, who leads the Socialist Group, who now think that I'm somehow very, very dangerous. Well, perhaps to the political class I'm dangerous, but in terms of democracy, I don't think I pose any threat to anybody. All I am doing in this Parliament, by saying what I say, and perhaps upsetting Mr Schulz and Mr Pottering and others, all I am doing is representing a point of view that is held by tens of millions of decent, law-abiding people right across the European Union. To find out more about who we are and what we stand for, go to the UK Independence Party website at www.ukip.org.